Hello my friends, this is Lindy. Welcome to Lindy's Magpie Reads. Before I start telling you about books, a little bit about what's been going on with me this week. Our friends have returned from their holiday, and so we're no longer dog sitting. We're down to one puppy, one cat. Things are much quieter around here. I've also resumed work on my online dye course. So this past week there's been a lot of steaminess in the kitchen because I've been steaming these pieces of cotton, the fabric that I have dyed, and the steaming is the final process. Yeah, and I've still got quite a few more modules to get through, and it's peony time in the garden. So I will have some pictures of peonies at the end of this video for those of you who like garden photos. We had really heavy rain in the night last night, a big thunderstorm, and so I'm glad that I took pictures of peonies beforehand because some of them are looking pretty limp now. So 8 books I've finished in the last week, and of those 4 are by LGBTQ2S plus authors. 3 are by Canadian authors, 3 are audiobooks. There's 1 graphic novel, there's 1 picture book, 1 collection of short stories, 2 nonfiction, and 2 novels. I'm going to save the best for last, but I'm starting off strong with this graphic novel adaptation of Euripdes' play, Trojan Women. The text is by the Canadian poet Anne Carson, and the illustrations are by Rosanna Bruno, who I believe is in New York City. It's a kind of whimsical, fantastical take. There are 3 main women characters: Hecate, Cassandra, and Andromache, and they're portrayed as animals, actually all but Cassandra. She looks human, but the chorus is all dogs and cows. The Hecate is an old dog. Helen is a fox in high heels. Actually, sometimes she transforms into a hand mirror. There's black and white, very expressive artwork. In this opening, Poseidon is giving us the prologue. Troy, I'll give you Troy, luxurious, damp, and full of spies. It crouched on the plain like James Baldwin, with its eyelids drifting down and drifting up. You know that poem of Frederick Seidel, where James Baldwin is a leopard? The leopard kills and eats its trainer every day. Well, goodbye to all that. Troy kills and eats no more. The sad thing about war is that what was relevant in ancient Greece remains relevant today: the effect of war on human beings. So there's a lot of humor in this, but also a lot of pathos. Hecate has a choice. If she's a polite prisoner of war, a slave, then they will allow her to bury her youngest son, who's still a baby. And actually that baby is portrayed as a sapling in this book. The portrayal of Athene I thought was really good too. She is a pair of war heart cover overalls and an owl mask. There's the chorus around the outside. The Trojan horse. The reason I picked this up is because of Natalie Haynes. When I listened to her Pandora's Jar, and she talked about how much she admired the plays of Euripdes and how he wrote really great women characters. And so I'm really glad that I found this. It's excellent. And here's another book about people and war. Children in this case. It's called Nour's Secret Library, and it is by a Lebanese author, Wafa Tarnowska, and the illustrations are done by a Romanian artist, Vali Mintzi. Tarnowska said that she was inspired by a true story of a secret library or basement library that was put together in Daria, which is a city near Damascus in Syria. And she also drew on her own experiences of being a child during war in Lebanon. Mintzi has used mostly red, blue, and gold gouache for her illustrations. But whenever she is showing, the setting here is Damascus, and whenever she's showing the city being bombed or during wartime, it's black and white with charcoal. Very effectively done. And children spend a lot of time sheltering in basements with their neighbors. It's books that help them cope. The secret library had become a safe port in a sea of war. In the back matter, there's more explanation about Syria. There's a glossary and examples of famous libraries from the ancient Middle East. In the author's note, she says, I read about people who were suffering more than I was. Those books gave me courage to cope with the senseless destruction happening around me. Books are one of the ways people cope with disaster, war, and despair. I believe that our souls need books just like our bodies need food. The primary audience would be children in middle school from about grade 4 to grade 8, but I also recommend it for teens and adults. Next, I got a collection of poetry called Cut to Fortress, and it is by a non-binary Indigenous Canadian, Tawahum Bige. Tawahum Bige is from Lutselk'dene Nation and has other heritage as well. Plains Cree and settler. He's a spoken word poet and also an activist. He was jailed for violating a court injunction, just offering prayers to bring attention to stop the Trans Mountain extension of the pipeline to the British Columbia coast. In the bio for Tawahum Bige, both they, them, and he, him pronouns are used. So I went to their website and found the same thing. So that's kind of interesting. I'll read a little bit from one poem to give you a flavor. This one is called Too Abstract. I write colonization into poem. My writing professor calls it too abstract, though these brown eyes see clearly that it is concrete. And a stanza a little bit later, colonization is the children's book my Dene mother reads to me at 5, Cowboys and Indians. It's imagination running across the plains with me on horseback, smell of sage as a child, but sense of protocol scooped in the 60s. I want to be an Indian, Mom. You are, honey. You are. Next up, This one is a contender for the Scotia Giller Prize this year. It is by a Newfoundlander, Lisa Moore, and the title is This Is How We Love. Lisa Moore is so good at characters and setting. So this is set during this huge snowstorm in St. John's. And it's a real event that they called Snowmageddon. I'll read you a passage in a bit, give you an idea of what that was like. And the opening scene has a young man in ICU. He's been badly beaten up and stabbed. He's unconscious, and his mother, Jules, is at his bedside. So the text moves a lot between viewpoints, and it also moves back in time. The characterization is excellent. If you're reading for character, I think you will like this. I struggled with it a little bit, and I realized that it was because of the violence. And it's just been really hard for me to read about violence for some reason. So what I ended up doing was skipping to the back of the book and reading a few chapters at the end so that I would know how things turned out for this young man in the hospital. And that let me sort of calm down and continue reading the book in order. If you're reading for plot, probably not such a good idea, but this book really isn't so much about plot anyway. It's more about our family connections. It's about parenting, the bonds between parent and child, and not just biological parents, but step parents, foster parents, no biological relation at all between adult and child, and still having that bond. It's about old people, middle-aged people, young people, ordinary people who do good things and bad things. It's about the people in society who fall through the cracks, and what do we do about that? Is love the answer? So that section, and I've also marked some Tim Hortons passages. I don't know if I've mentioned before that whenever I come across a reference to Tim Hortons in literature, I make note of it and I collect those passages on my book blog. So here's the snowstorm. Everything would be buried in 75 centimeters of snow, and it would still keep snowing. It would snow the next day, and the next, and the next, and the next. It would snow forever. The houses shook. Water in the toilet bowls sloshed. Roofs blew off. The plows were taken off the streets. The city pulled all the plows because the snow was too heavy. The plows broke down under the weight. Then the plows were buried. The windows blew out of the ambulances, one paramedic would tell me. They had to drive with no windows. I felt it was me. I was generating the storm, making it happen with my rage. The rage was as big as the storm, just as malevolent, tearing out of my chest. And yeah, she's at her son's bedside. He's not doing well. Lisa Moore doesn't usually have much specific Newfoundlander vocabulary in her books, but there's a little bit, including the word flankers, which is a bright spark that flies up from a fire. And I think there is another place where a nurse is saying that the doctor will be along the once. He'll be along now the once, meaning right away. And I recognize that as a Newfoundland expression as well. Next up is a novel that I listened to in audio. It's called True Biz by Sara Novic. Sara Novic is deaf, and in the print version of this book, there are apparently a lot of illustrations. So what they did with the audio to capture a bit of that flavor is when there was a deaf conversation happening, when signing was happening, you could hear this sort of rustling sound or tapping, slapping of hands, that sort of thing. It was just a little bit of sound accompanying the reading. And the reading is done by Lisa Flanagan. And then there are short interspersed chapters that has background information about ASL and deaf culture, and those are done by another narrator, Kaleo Griffith. So the story is set in a school for the deaf in the US. Some of the issues in there include cochlear implants and the controversies surrounding it, and whether or not it's good to expose children to sign language if you want them to get along well in a hearing world. So one of the main characters, Charlie, she has an implant that's not working well, and her parents have had her in a regular school system where she's only able to hear about 60% of what's going on. She's very frustrated, and she's never learned sign language, so it's not until she's in high school that as a last resort she's going to this school for the deaf. Some of the surprising things that I learned included stuff about Alexander Graham Bell, who supported eugenics, and even though he had deaf family members, he was of the opinion that deaf people needed to integrate with hearing population so that deaf people wouldn't interbreed and have deaf children. The other main character in this novel is the director of the school, who's a lesbian, and her parents were deaf, so she is fully bilingual with ASL. When I was working at the post office, I worked in the plant, and there were a number of deaf employees there, and I got to be friends with a deaf woman named Jewel, and she taught me signed English. She said it's easier to learn than ASL because the grammar is just like English. And Jewel told me about how she had to teach her sister in secret sign language because at home she was not allowed to sign, but the way that she could easily communicate was through sign language. So yeah, she and her sister, who was hearing, hid the fact that they could communicate. It's heartbreaking, it really is, and a very interesting novel. I'm really glad that I listened to that one. Another audiobook that I listened to is David Sedaris' new book, Happy Go Lucky. So, collection of humorous essays, mostly talking about his life, travel pre-COVID and post worldwide spread of COVID. I would say I really enjoyed it, but I would say it's probably not the best Sedaris to start with if you haven't listened to any of his before. He does read his own work on the audiobook, and some of the pieces are from taped live performances. I loved hearing about his close relationship with his sisters. He went with his sister Lisa to a shooting gallery, I guess it's called. Neither of them had handled guns before, and so that was pretty funny. And there's quite a poignant section about his father, who had been pro-Trump all his life. And then when he was in his mid-90s, probably the last year before he died, he admitted that maybe Trump wasn't such a good option for president after all. And even the fact of David's father admitting that he had been wrong was a big deal. There are also passages where David talks about being in New York City during lockdown, where masks were required anytime you were out on the street. Manages to make things both funny and sad at the same time. And the last audiobook I listened to was a collection by Lisa Schneidau called Botanical Folktales of Britain and Ireland. And she connected each story with different trees and plants as they gain prominence through the seasons, starting with winter into spring, summer, fall. Primroses, dandelions, runner beans, which Jack and the Beanstalk, I learned that folktale is over 5,000 years old. I don't know exactly how they figure stuff like that out, but it's pretty cool. And this is an audiobook that is fine for all ages. I would recommend it for like maybe a family car trip, something like that. The audio is read by Joan Walker. And last off, 5-star read, best book in this past week. It's a collection of short stories called A Rental Heart and Other Stories by Kirsty Logan, who is a Scottish lesbian writer. This one won the Polari Prize, which is a queer fiction award. And one of the stories in here is The Gracekeeper, and Kirsty Logan extended that into a full-length novel more recently, which I had read first. I really liked it. But the reason that I picked this up is because of Jen the librarian. She was talking about the Polari Prize, and so I went and looked to see who previous winners were, and I'm really glad that I did that because this was highly enjoyable. The stories are kind of steampunk, fantastical. Some are only a couple pages long, some are a bit longer than that. They're fairy tale-esque, no pure realism. And here's a little taste of the writing. Oh, how I have loved. My days are flaxen and holy with love. My nights are viscous, lucid, spilling over. My finger pads hum. The roots of my hair feel gold dipped. The meat of my eyes is speckled with gold. Gold dust blows across my cheeks. The girls and their love. No need for sleep when their saliva is sustenance. Their sweet country cunts and their kiss. I find them, I whisper of my home, and they're up on my horse before the daisies close. The look in their eyes is clean as dawn. Their fingers in my mouth taste of buttermilk. My castle is a mother, is a lover. Once upon a time, I say, and they follow my hooves inside the walls, and I close the door up tight behind them. Yes, how she lures those women to her. Yeah, bunch of queer stories, so much fun. So that's it for this week. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.